last time and learned that there's a particular kind of approach to ethics which attempts to sort of replace the need to do independent ethics with the idea that somehow religion has in some way already fulfilled that role. We don't need really to do independent ethics because religion provides us with all the resources that we need in order to make all the kinds of judgments that we do in ethics. And we saw in particular that our defender of this specific version of divine command theory thinks there's really only one version of divine command theory that will fit that bill, and that's the Christian version of the theory. And again, that theory then says that what's right is right for everybody and finds its basis in Christian theology. And even if sometimes it's hard for us to follow God's commandments because we don't specifically know them, Mortimer provided us with sort of illustrations of how to use the theory in a way which sort of makes that problem a little bit less serious. Because what we can do is use the Bible as a sort of fertile source to understand God's nature and look at the judgments that he's made. Sometimes it will be directly addressed in the way of commandments, and sometimes our access to knowledge about God's will concerning our behavior will have to be constructed out of what's said there. And again, all the sort of features that we learn about God, plus all the sort of examples that we have, allow us to do things like make reasonable judgments about the nature of slavery, the death penalty, and so on. What we can do is sort of see that God has in mind a particular kind of lifestyle for us, which is supposed to be just like his own behavior, and that behavior is going to be more easily ascertained the more we look at that source. So again, we got the slavery example as kind of a clear illustration of a wrong that, again, has been changed. We saw him addressing the death penalty as a kind of situation where we really, if we're going to be Christian, cannot support that view. And if you're a divine command theorist, it makes that action morally wrong, and undisputably so. There is no way Mortimer thinks that endorsing the death penalty is consistent with Christian practice. You can imagine that what he's going to say about other examples, and it shouldn't be too hard once we recognize that one of the core sort of things that you learn in looking at the Bible and looking at God's actions as they're spelled out there are these things about human value, the idea that there are inalienable rights and that everybody's value is infinite and equal. So on the model of these examples, what do you think he's going to say about abortion? What is divine command theory going to tell us about abortion? It's a serious moral wrong because you're taking the life that has infinite value and you're doing so in such a way that it violates God's sort of attitude about when those kind of things can be done, and we are not allowed to engage in those kind of behaviors. Likewise, what do you think divine command theory of this sort is going to tell us about euthanasia? Serious moral wrong as well. Notice now it was not that difficult to render pretty convincingly grounded judgments about those things, even though nowhere in the Bible does it actually mention specific commandments about those behaviors. So there is something to what Mortimer says. Once we learn the basic nature of judgments and see how there are sort of common themes running through these judgments, it's not really that hard all the time to determine what's right and what's wrong, even though we don't have, say, direct access to God's mind and his will, nor do we have direct access to a full set of commandments, like a book which describes every possible situation we could find ourselves in and what God says about those. So what we have to do is sort of follow this model. Now, we're going to see that even once we've given this sort of best foot forward kind of interpretation of divine command theory, that there are serious, serious problems with the theory. So much so that we're going to find that it's a totally indefensible theory. And we'll build that criticism up today. There are a number of things we can overall say about the theory, but there's one core problem with the theory which specifically targets Mortimer's version of divine command theory. But there's going to be a host of other problems for the alternatives as well. So let's dive in and sort of take stock of what's going on. So Timmons tells us that, of course, this is a particularly widespread view about ethics. Not for any bad reason, it just happens to be the case that the common view, a naive view, we're going to see, but a common view is that morality and religion are deeply interconnected in some way. In fact, they're supposed to be so interconnected that you don't really need to independently work out morality, because religion is going to fulfill that function. This is an example when we were talking about the beginning sort of understanding of ethics, this sort of basic kind of commonplace idea that we can pass the buck. We don't need to do morality. We don't need to learn independent truths about morality, because religion has already fulfilled that role. Now, the most extreme version of this view, in terms of that relationship, is just this sort of substitute view that we call divine command theory. And divine command theory holds that religion determines morality. So you don't need to do anything other than to sort of understand the proper religious sort of stance, and thereby, if you sort of comport with that, so you follow the religious rules, you will thereby be satisfying our standards of what count as sort of moral standards. On this view, then, we should be clear. There would be no morality without religion. And the idea here is that morality is entirely dependent on religion. So there is no residue, so to speak. There's no sort of part of morality that we have to do that would not already be sort of taken care of and covered by religion. So again, that would be convenient for reasons that we talked about before, because if we want then to lead moral lives and make sure that we're on the right side of morality, all we need to do then is to sort of go and sort of do the proper religious sorts of things that the religion in question tells us. So Mortimer's view that we just looked at, this version of divine command theory, is this really paradigmatic version of this theory. It's the sort of most well-known. It's tricked out, and it's actually a good version of the theory in the sense that it's really strong. It's not some sort of wishy-washy version of divine command theory, which says that everybody ought to follow their own religious sort of identity, so that different people of different religions just ought to do what the religion says. That view is a particularly exceptionally poor version of the sort of connection between morality and religion, because it's subject to all the sorts of skeptical worries we have about variation in terms of different religions. Mortimer has no such idea in mind. And again, as I mentioned last class, he has two targets in mind. He wants first to argue against the idea that there's any other kind of moral theory that would be right, but he also is going to argue against any other form of divine command theory. He thinks there's only one correct form of divine command theory, and that's the Christian theological version of divine command theory. For reasons that we'll see, and he thinks that there are special virtues associated with the Christian version. But we get this basic view. If you accept that, in this sense, religion absorbs morality, it's done in this following way. An act is right, if and only if it's commanded by God. So there is nothing to rightness and wrongness other than commandments that are issued by God. So to understand, apply divine command theory, all you need to do is make sure that you're following those commandments. There's nothing more to it than that. Likewise, the same kind of thing can be said about moral value. And a being is good in the sense of being intrinsically morally good if and only if God commands that it is. So God determines not only what actions are right or wrong, but also what beings have good character and bad character. So those judgments are all to be found in God's commandments. There would be no good and bad people unless God commanded truths about those sorts of things. Now, as we've often done in terms of our theories we've already looked at, it's useful and instructive to learn a bit about the theories by looking at the reasons people have given to accept this particular moral theory. And in the case of divine command theory, there are historically three kinds of arguments that people have given in order to try to sort of establish that this is a good sort of approach. And we'll find that one of them is very familiar, one is very easy to understand, and then one is going to turn out to be the best sort of approach for people who want to pursue this line of thinking. So we'll look at linguistic arguments and the argument for moral objectivity. We're just going to find that they're both miserably bad arguments. And as a result, what we're going to find is that the specifically religious arguments in favor of divine command theory are the most popular and the most defensible in some respect. And it's in fact the same kind of argument that Mortimer gives. So good for us to see, though, however, that there are alternatives that people have pursued. So let's begin with the linguistic arguments for divine command theory, and this should sound very familiar to us at this point. What people who pursue this line of argument in favor of divine command theory suggest is the following thing. They suggest that when we use expressions like it's obligatory to give to charity or it's wrong to steal, what we really mean is that God commanded those things to have the statuses that they have. So people who sort of pursue this route argue that there are certain kinds of